Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Covenant Cast, where we discuss the past, present, and future of the tabletop gaming industry. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven, and we're back with another episode of our Power 7 series, a part of the long-running How to Ruin a Game pipeline. We're talking to Justin Gary today. Justin has a prolific career in games and game design, started as a Magic the Gathering Pro Tour player back in the kind of golden age, I would say, of that. And then went on to do Ascension, the deck building game, probably best known for that. SolForge Fusion, which recently came into our orbit. Did some work on games like WoW Miniatures and a lot along the way. So Justin's going to be talking about memory and the idea of this memory tax, that, there's a lot of games that handle memory and a player's memory in a different way. Some games don't have a limit on the number of things on the board or the number of effects that can be in play. Or
I'm looking at you, Star Wars CCG.
They stack up the plus ones in 20 different ways. Maybe they have 16 different zones. And so it's definitely a consideration of what a game brings to the table, and it can go a lot of different directions. So we can't wait. We hope you'll join us talking to Justin Gary about memory. Stay tuned. All right, here we are with Justin Gary, Stoneblade Entertainment, previous Magic Pro Tour extraordinaire, now pushing SolForge Fusion out to the masses. Justin, it's great to have you here. How are things going for you?
Oh, phenomenal. It's been just super exciting, as we kind of, talked about before we started recording, like SolForge Fusion. We've finally started to get to show off the versions to real humans and play, and it's been so exciting. Like, again, I've worked on this for a decade, depending on how you count it. And so seeing it in real people's hands and getting that like final product in my hands has been just amazing. So working very hard, lots going on, but it's exactly where I want to be in my life right now.
Well, we're of course very happy to hear that, as a huge fans of the game as well. SolForge Fusion does a great job on this topic of memory, which is, this idea of like, it's kind of hard to nail down, but these like infinite board states, these moments where there's so much to remember that it maybe takes away from the actual fundamental enjoyment of the game. So I just want to kick this over to you. Let's start with the idea of taxing player memory and how that's risky, and kind of how do you approach game design on your end to find the perfect balance of like how many of these kinds of effects can we have out at once?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. Very deep topic. I always zoom back out when I'm asking about a game design and you're trying to decide what do you want to include, what do you want to take away. You have to go to the fundamentals, right? What is the core tension of your game? Where is the fun and the excitement and the push and pull of your game? And when you know what that is, you can answer a lot of these other questions about whether it's memory tax or any of the other, sins or challenges, right? What does it make sense? Is it worth it in your game, right? So for example, if you talk about a game like memory tax is perfectly fine, because the fun of the game, the tension of the game is, can I remember where the things were? And trying to keep track of that is what you're buying into. It's what you're opting into. And that's where the tension is. Or even a game like, say, Blackjack. Right? In Blackjack, if you're one of the fun things to do is to count cards, right? Is to think, okay, well, I can remember that there's been a lot of 10s lately, so I could probably push this way, or there hasn't, right? And so for a player where your only edge is, if you want to get into it, is like doing that kind of counting, then maybe memory tax is okay, and some of that makes sense. But if you're playing a core game like Magic or a TCG or SolForge Fusion, where the fun is trying to figure out the tactics of the moment, or maybe plan for the future of how you're going to level something, or really outwit your opponent with a secret surprise. And when you think about those exciting moments, typically speaking, requiring people to just do all this busy work of remembering what's going on. And it's not even about me being clever. It's about, oh yeah, I forgot you had that other card in play, and obviously this is dumb and I lose. Great. Awesome. Cool. Bye. Thanks. Right. We've all
been there, man.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
We've all been there, right? It's just like, it's, we always refer to the terms of onboard tricks, right? Onboard tricks, or those things that, like, if it's just like, okay, if I just remember that exists, then I would never play this way. And if I don't, if I remember, nobody feels happy, right? It's just like, okay, it just does its thing, and it's just it's just this like permeating thing I have to keep in mind. And if I forget, then nobody feels happy either, right? Maybe my opponent's like, haha, I win, but it doesn't feel very satisfying. And for me, I just feel stupid, right? So you, on balance, the emotions that you get out of those kinds of experiences are almost always negative. And so if the core tension of your game is something else, like how do I manage my mana resource in a game like Magic, or how do I choose to play creatures in lanes now versus level them in a game like SolForge Fusion, your every other piece of mental homework that you're forcing people to do takes away from that experience.
Do you have any like prime time examples of where those kinds of situations have arisen in your experience as a player, or like when you're going into game design or maybe playtest and you notice, well, this isn't quite working for me? Like, has that ever happened in a crystallizing way for you?
Oh, many, many times. So, I'll highlight a few examples, and I'll take some from kind of around the world here, because I want to not just highlight the negatives, but also the positives of where memory tax plays in. So, one of the earlier games that I loved but hated the memory tax portion of it was Settlers of Catan, right? In Settlers of Catan, it's critically important to know what resources your opponents have. That is public information. You know every resource they get. But it's hidden because they hold it in their hand, typically speaking, in a game. And so you just have to kind of remember all of this stuff in order to play and manage it. And it's like right at this edge of like, you can track it all, but it's annoying and it matters sometimes. It doesn't matter other times. And so it lives in this like perfectly hellish space of where I don't want memory taxes to be, right? And so that's one thing where an example where it really fails from my gameplay experience. One element where it failed from my design experience, and I won't even go from playtesting, I'll go from like one of my early designs that I actually made it to print, and the Versus System trading card game. I was the lead design on the Infinite Crisis expansion. And one of the cool mechanics that I had was the Dr. Fate's artifacts. And these were these equipment that you could equip onto a character, because the story of Dr. Fate, for anyone that's not a comic book fan, anybody who wears his gear becomes Dr. Fate. Like, you just get all the superpowers and you're amazing. And so I wanted that experience, but I wanted to be super powerful, but I wanted to make it hard. So you had to like equip all 4 pieces of his gear to get all the powers. And that meant each individual piece had something you had to remember. If that piece was on that character, okay, this one gives it +1 attack and can't be targeted. And this one gives it +1 defense and it can move, and it just like, it was you could know if you had them all there what it was supposed to do, because that's what Dr. Fate did. But it was so annoying to remember, oh wait, that's the amulet, it does this thing, and that's the helmet, and that does this thing. And so it'd be, in practice, it was a little cumbersome, to say the least. And there's a lot of, obviously, if you're a designer and you're not embarrassed about some of your designs from years ago, then you're not growing. So I'll take it for what I can, but definitely something I look back on and cringe a little bit. And
yeah.
But I want to give one other example that kind of takes it in a different direction, because I want to talk about a time where memory tax actually works in my favor as a designer. So Ascension, the deck building game I'm probably most well known for, when you kill monsters, you're trying to gain honor as a class to victory. And when you kill monsters, you get honor beads that are like right in front of you. You can see the tokens in front of you. And whenever you buy a card, you also get honor. Now, in the original version of this game, you also got honor beads that would just be put in front of you. And what would happen is you could look around the room, and at a glance, you would know exactly who was winning and exactly by how much. And as the game progresses, at a certain point, you could realize like, there's really like no way I can win right now. Like, I could just do the math and it's just too hard. And so you could be discouraged and you could feel like you're out of the game. And so I made one change where the honor on the cards you buy is listed on the card. And it's just a little bit too hard for someone to actually track what's going on there, right? The cards and the honor that's in the deck is just so many little bits here and there. You get a sense of it. You have a feeling like I'm winning, a feeling like I'm losing, but you don't know exactly. And that obfuscation makes the game way more fun. Because the fun of a deck building game of building up your deck and accomplishing your mission and getting more powerful, you get to experience that whole arc. Whether you win or lose, you just at the end kind of figure it out. And it's not that bad when you lose, because you had this fun and this growth curve. And so in this case, when you push memory past a certain point within certain contexts, it actually can make a game more fun. So I just kind of want to just throw that example in just to show where it's not like a pure negative, even in the kind of strategy card games like we all know and love.
Yeah, and I think that's a different, it's hidden enough, right? I think the thing you were defining earlier is the worst, which is I just forgot that card was on the table. And especially in games when there's a lot of cards on the table and it's like, oh, you had that location out and it did this thing and I forgot this piece. And we'll obviously come back to the memory tax, intellectual / the brain work part of it. But you said something earlier that I just wanted to poke into a little bit while I have you here, which is you said the emotions that happen in a player when that happens, that feeling of feeling stupid, or like I didn't, even as the winner, maybe I don't feel like I earned it. So how much of a role does how someone feels while they're playing a game play in you when you're designing a concept for a game? Just how much is that weighing on your mind? And do you have examples of where how someone feels during a game has been affected by something you changed on the design front?
Oh, I mean, listen, if game designers are minors, then feelings are the gold you're looking for, right? Like it is 100% the heart of what we do. Now, it's easy to start from a place, and I did as well, right? Where I came from this as a pro player background, and I came from it as like a numbers and logic and winning and strategy and all the like tactics and being able to see all that. And that's great. Like I love that stuff. But at the end of the day, the cash value of what we do as designers is the feelings. The reasons you guys are here doing what you do and playing games is because of the feelings that you have playing games, the experiences you get to have with friends around the table and laughing and telling stories and, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. And, the crushing defeat and the exciting victories and the seeing your creative plans come together, right? All of those things are like emotion. So, to ask the question of like, what is it, how much does that impact me as a designer? There's nothing that impacts me more. It is the heart of it. So it is, and it's funny to talk about it this way because, again, I think a lot of us come from this background of being typically analytical and logical, and like we think about things in that term. And that's when I broke it down and finally was like, okay, what is the logical conclusion? And how does this go to here? I was like, oh no, yeah, what I need to pay out in is emotion. And so every decision I make about what to include in the game and how to make trade-offs from one aspect to another, because there's always trade-offs, right? Typically speaking, when designers introduce all these cool things, oh, there's this location that has this cool effect, and there's this character that has this cool effect, and that affects everything else. It creates cool, interesting interactions and different possibilities. And this card with this card has a totally unforeseen reaction than you would have seen otherwise. And so you have to make these trade-offs with the hope that you're going to get the best experiences for the players without, most of the time, and minimize the amount of times where they're going to have these negative, painful experiences. So it's a very powerful core of anyone that wants to work in design. And when you think back, or anybody that's listening thinks back to what they love about games and the experiences that come up, it's always those big emotional moments. It's always those things, and the fun of figuring something out is part of that. But it's really those core emotions that it evokes is at the heart of everything.
That's a really good framing mechanism for kind of this dichotomy that we can set up between your experience as a player of Magic and your experience as a designer of SolForge Fusion. How did your experience interacting with this memory taxing idea in Magic, where I know that you don't have limited battlefields, you can have a lot of effects on the board? How did you take that and use it when it came to SolForge Fusion?
Well, there's a lot of aspects to this, and SolForge Fusion is a really interesting case because, as you guys know, it was originally designed as SolForge, which was a purely digital game, and there's a whole different type of memory that you're allowed to get away with, things you can get away with in a digital world and that you can't in a physical world. And so we were actually operating under frameworks of, okay, well, what's this going to look like on screen real estate, right? How can I manage this on a phone? So I had to think about how much information are we allowed to process here visually, right? You want to be able to take everything in. And so how much stuff can be in play, how much stuff can be in your hand became a huge factor, as well as the types of things we've already been talking about. Of course, you don't want to have it be that if I'm going to be paying attention to lane-based combat, typically speaking, I don't want to have to pay attention to what's going on in lane 5 when I'm trying to evaluate what's happening in lane 1, right? If I'm trying to make a tactically interesting decision around a game where I've got 5 cards in my hand, and each of those cards has 3 levels, right? Where I need to understand what's happening long-term, short-term. There's plenty of material to wrestle with there. We don't need any extra bells and whistles, right? We don't need to have those extra, levels of memory tax or potential global effects to give you enough interesting meat on the bones to really dive in and enjoy the tactical play, right? And that's really what it is. Like, you want to get enough strategic depth with the minimal amount of cognitive overhead as you can, and that's really at the heart of any kind of deep TCG like experience. That's kind of where you want to live, and the best designers are the ones that can make those trade-offs in ways that are really fulfilling.
Yeah, there's a fascinating question in that response, which is like, So you had SolForge, which is designed digitally, and then you kind of now have the spirit of this game that people love, and you bring that into the physical world, and you don't probably want to change it dramatically or too much. You did do some changes with the way the Forgeborn and Severus mechanics work, but it makes me wonder. So if you put yourself in the mindset of designing SolForge, but as a physical game originally, didn't have to design it for digital at all. Do you think anything fundamentally would have changed about what SolForge ended up being?
I'm not sure I ever would have made this game if I didn't start that way. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, the idea of cards that level up as you play was made because I was like, oh, it's digital. We could just do it. No problem. Like, it's so cool. It's such a great mechanic. And nobody would ever do this in physical. That would be crazy.
Wrote a letter to yourself.
Oh, man. And so that's where we started. I mean, I got some great quotes from Richard about this too. Where it's just like, we never thought that it would. So there's no way I would have started from this place if it was going to be a physical game, because I just would have thought the challenge was too hard. But I'm very grateful that I did, because the gameplay was so compelling. That feeling of like being able to level up the cards and the texture that can come from each card, and the fact that we can balance the cards without any kind of traditional resource mechanism and have all of that play in, and the stories we can tell, all of that was so magical and so amazing that I was like, okay, I will find a way to do this. And once we kind of hit on the idea of the algorithmically generated decks and how having those things kind of chunked together, and then just worked through the, even the sort of the ergonomics of how you pile the cards and level up the decks and everything, like, it suddenly was like, okay, yeah, this is going to work. And you can feel the awesomeness that was originally we thought could only be digital. And now it's absolutely worth it. Yes, there's more work to do by yourself when it's physical, but it's so worth it and so exciting. So to answer your question, I think zero chance I would have made this game if I started here, and it certainly wouldn't be anything like what it is today. But I'm really grateful, and this is another great lesson as a designer or any creative, that restrictions breed creativity. Right? The fact that I was in one box where I had to build a game that lived on a phone, but I didn't have the restrictions of modifying cards and all that stuff, created the lane-based combat and created this leveling mechanic. And then the restrictions of having to bring it back into physical created all these other cool elements, like really taking advantage of algorithmically generated decks and smash ups, creating the Forgeborn character as a way to track the turn structure that ended up becoming this super cool character that you get to embody, right? And it was only because I played with these restrictions that I thought were impossible, or would have told you were impossible, 5-10 years ago, now created something that the world has never seen, and I'm just super, super proud of, as is Richard, of course.
This is it's not out of left field, but it is pretty tangential. There's this concept that I remember hearing about a long time ago, and it was basically that we had this concept that technology was just going to take human stuff and make it obsolete, and just be better than humans because it's so efficient and so capable. But there was a study, and it was like, what people found was that they introduced synthesizers and machines that were making music that humans had never made before. And then humans actually took that and started making it with traditional instruments in a way that they had never done. And it just reminded me that you, with the SolForge approach, that digital first approach, actually allowed you to do something physically that maybe we would never have thought to do otherwise, which is just when you really think about the implications of that, it's the possibilities of what we can do is pretty wild.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that all creativity is tied to technological innovation, right? If you look at through the history of even just scientific revolutions as well as invention, you see that certain telescopes had to exist for Galileo to make his kind of discoveries, right? And when you see, obviously the creation of the iPhone and what it unlocked as far as the way that gaming principles evolved and what things we could learn from that and then take and port back to where we are. Now, SolForge and SolForge Fusion has benefited from two of these revolutions, not just the phone and the tablet kind of revolution and bringing what we love about physical TCGs into the digital space, but now bringing it back with the very new technology of digital printing and how we can generate cards that give us that experience the experience we all loved of like busting open a pack of cards and seeing things you've never seen before. Like I just got a report from one of my team on this. We have I mentioned in just set one alone, with the way our algorithm generates cards, we have over 25,000 possible cards that can be generated. And we did, 50,000 something decks for the Kickstarter backers. And we've still only made like 2,200 of those 25,000 cards. Like there's so many number one possibilities and unforeseen things that are coming as part of our first edition run for the retail, and so many more that will get discovered. And then again, that number of possibilities just exponentially increases once we introduce set 2. And so that discovery process is there, and you have it forever, right? Functionally. And that's something that's super, super exciting. And again, it's taking the core experience, the joy that I remember as a kid cracking a pack, that then to some extent got destroyed by the internet, right? The fact the internet came into play and spoilers were out everywhere. Like I'm just one of those people, like I can't resist looking at the spoiler. If I know it's there, I'm not going to be the only guy at the room that doesn't know what's going on. But it took something away from me, like, and partly my own psychology, but partly the fact that this technology was there, and now this new technology can bring back that core experience that we love in a new way, and so it's very exciting to see and play with the edges of it. That's honestly the thing that kind of motivates Richard and I the most right now. It's one of the reasons we love working together, because we're always excited about like, okay, what's next? Like, what's the thing that hasn't been done before that can take the things that we love and present them in a new way, or present these new possibilities for play and engagement. And it's just a really exciting space to be in.
Well, there's certainly, I'm sure, a number of designers out there asking, what's next. And many of them, of course, will be prone to make mistakes that have been made previously, given a lot of these mechanics we talk about today. Do you have any particular advice when you're approaching the memory tax problem as a designer that you would transmit, to other designers so they don't have to learn the same lessons that you have the hard way?
Yeah. I mean, I've already touched on some of them here, right? And the most important thing at its core, you need to understand what the core tension of your game is, right? What's the heart of what you're doing? And every single mechanic, every single card, every single piece of what you add in has to be evaluated in relation to that, insofar as it makes the core tension better, like more intense, more exciting, the wins more, more extreme. Those then it's very likely that it's going to be worthwhile to add into your game. Insofar as it takes away from it, as often memory tax in particular does, because I've got to focus some percentage of my brain on other things, then it's something you almost certainly will want to cut. You definitely also want to be able to, in addition to knowing your core tension, knowing your target audience is key. The more sophisticated your audience, the more what I like to call complexity points you have to play with, right? And that comes with complexity points in terms of learning the game and just getting the barrier to entry to getting in. It's in terms of complexity points of how many things do I have to pay attention to at once while I play. And then the question is, do you want to spend them here, right? There might be some cards that are just so cool that even though I have to remember that, okay, the first card that comes to my mind is like Form of the Dragon from Magic, where it's like, okay, you guys can't attack me from when non-flying creatures can't attack me, and I get to attack for 5 every turn, and I have only 5 health, but it resets every turn. And that's like a lot of like random stuff to remember. But the story it tells unites it all. And so that's another like little designer trick, right? If you can tell a narrative that brings a bunch of random stuff together that makes it intuitive, that helps to make things easier. And the other piece is like, if the juice is worth the squeeze, okay, right? It's sometimes worth it to add some memory tax into your game. But just, you need to be very conscious of it, right? And be very conscious of how you're spending those limited resources of complexity points. And then thinking about it in terms of the, places where you can get those wins, right? Either something that's super light memory tax, where it's like, okay, I can need to remember this thing, but every time I glance over, graphic design and layout can be a huge difference here, right? If you have just giant +1 armor to adjacent creatures, right? Like that's something we've played around with in SolForge Fusion. Like typically speaking, we want to keep it so that each card only affects its own lane. But having some cards that affect adjacent maybe is fun to play with, and adjacency is an interesting mechanic. So, but insofar as we're doing that, we're making it very visibly clear. We're trying to, how do we communicate that to the player in a way that's like easy to recognize at a glance? So visual representation and graphic hierarchy matter a lot. And then you can also play with elements where you're rotating these sorts of things, right? If in a good trading card game, or any expandable game like this, you want to if you're adding in some new interesting pieces that start playing with this and taxing your memory in some way, hopefully you can pull some away that were there before, right? So you're keeping yourself within this balance where, yeah, this is a tool I can use, but not something that's, okay, I have a hammer, so everything looks like a nail, and I'm just going to keep adding these things. So I guess that would be kind of my top line list of how I would think about how do you approach this if you're working on your own games out there.
Well, I would be disappointed in myself. I didn't try to get you on the record saying something scandalous. So here it is. So we've got modern game designs. We've been playing a ton of newer games. We've got like SolForge Fusion is a one that you're very familiar with. Has 5 lanes. You can't expand past that. So it naturally kind of limits a board state, right? We've got Flesh and Blood, which doesn't really have any persistent board states. You play cards, they go away at the end of the turn. You play cards, they go away. We have Ashes Reborn, where you have, depending on the hero you bring, they have a certain number of battlefield slots that you can utilize. Limited board state. So all these games seem to be saying like, hey, limited board state, don't make it infinite. So at this point, I mean, if you're coming into a design process for, let's say you're making a new competitive card game, and I know you're going to say it's context is important, and I agree with you, of course. But would you lean towards like, hey, we should probably have some kind of a mechanic here that makes sure a board state doesn't get super big?
Well, I don't think that I think that I'm trying to give you like a not contextual answer because I know that's not what you're looking for. It's like very hard to answer. Just like a flat answer to it. Like, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
yes, you should.
That. Yes, you should. Next question.
That's an okay answer.
No. I mean, it's you're probably never going to get that answer out of me. It's without some discussion. No, it is the juice worth the squeeze, right? If you're going to let board states run out of control, like sometimes cool stuff happens, right? In a game of Magic where I've got 50 squirrels in play and they're overrunning you, like there's something cool about that, right? But the price you're paying is high when, especially if you're going to be playing, in an app where things blow up and you can't track everything quickly, or if it's, going to slow down the game state, it's very hard to track. And it's not 50 squirrels, it's like 3 squirrels, 10 monkeys, 20 apes, and whatever. They all have different stats, right? So I think there is something exciting about the infinite. There's something cool about, anything's possible. And by playing within these boxes, we are removing that. And so there's a real price on the other side of it. So I don't want to tell people never do anything that can expand infinitely, but definitely, that's a red flag. You better know what you're doing. If you're going to go into that territory, be very conscious. And I know you guys are covering this in some of the other things, but like there's a whole bunch of those kinds of red flags, right? Anytime you're going to create, we could talk about some of these other ones I think are already on your list, but right, if I know I'm going to create something that's going to have an infinite recursion loop, or if I'm going to have something, or if I know I'm going to have something that's going to generate resources that are disproportionate to what else you can have, like these are all things like, can you do it? Yeah, you can, but boy, oh boy, like, really, that's the problem here. It's like if you look at even the best designers and the people who've been doing this forever, those are the areas where like you're very likely going to fail and you're very likely going to fall on your face. So just be very cautious, tread carefully in those waters is what I would say.
Well, Justin, you obviously have a lot of great things to say about mechanics. I think you're one of the great minds and speakers on these kinds of topics. So we want to give you plenty of time for our lightning round at the end of the episode. But before we do, I just want to quickly, how is SolForge Fusion doing? How did Gamma go for you guys? I've heard a lot of good rumors that it was kind of the talk of the show. So how are you feeling about SolForge Fusion on the publisher side?
I cannot express how joyous we are about this. It was one of those magical lightning in a bottle kind of events. I mean, prior to the show, I did not have my hands on the actual Kickstarter product. We had the samples that I've sent. You guys have some, and we had some of the early prototypes. But the Tuesday before the hall opens, we get our hands on it, and they look awesome. And we solved a bunch of the little problems and things we found with the old version. Everything looks perfect. The scan your deck into the online account thing works, and export to tabletop simulator, everything just works. And we finally got to show it off to retailers and distributors, and people just loved it. I mean, we had one of the distributors host host a ballroom for us. They had a SolForge cake for us, and we had people playing, and then they would like play the game, love it, demo to their friend, take a copy, go start demoing for us, and it would just like spread virally throughout. And we have gotten just more excitement and more enthusiasm around this game than literally anything I've ever worked on in my entire 20 years making games. And so it's amazing, and it's one of those things where it's like it's so incredible, but it also is like woke my whole team up with like, wow, do we have a lot of responsibility on our shoulders right now? Like there is so much that we built something incredible. We know we have something incredible. We know people are going to love this game. They already, everyone who's seen it has loved it. And now it's just, okay, now we want to build that foundation that's going to last us for a decade, right? And we've already talked last time I was on the show about all the cool organized play program things we're doing and influencing the lore and how everyone's going to be able to create events and the deck's leveling up. And it's, the infrastructure is all getting set up. It's all happening, but it's just, we have so much that I don't want to mess it up, right? I care about this so much. I care about this community so much. And I think we've made something so special here. We're just, the whole team is thrilled and excited, but it's like, I mean, we literally ran into a problem. We're like, oh wow, there's not enough paper in the United States to print as many copies as we need to print right now. So we've had to like source other printers and figure out how to ship more paper over, and like, like good problem to have, I guess. But I did not think it was going to be a problem.
Amazing.
I did not think that was going to be a problem I had to solve, but here we are. So it's, go ahead.
I'm curious. That's a huge moment. You have to.
How cool!
I'm super. That's the first game we missed in a while. I'm a little sad that we weren't there for it now. But one thing I'm curious about. Real talk for a second. People out there listening. I think a lot of times there's an impression, and you present exceptionally professionally and exceptionally well. But I know back in the day, I remember early days of like Fantasy Flight Games, back in like the early Netrunner days and X-Wing days, when those games took off. There was this big assumption that like, FFG at the time was this like giant corporation with all these resources and stuff. I'm not necessarily going to get into all that here, but the main thing I'm curious about is, does this sort of reception and or early signs of success, outside of the energy levels, you said your team's kind of reawakened and excited, right? I mean, that's you have to get jazzed for that. But does it change anything for Stoneblade and also just your plans for the game? Like, it's clear this is striking a chord, and it seems like this is going to be a big deal, especially with retail partners and whatnot. We've already seen a ton of energy from the streams and the community we built and the subscriptions and whatnot. But how does this change the trajectory at all? Obviously a big responsibility, but I'm curious what that looks like for you.
Yeah, no, it's great in the sense that it now gives us more confidence to spend more on marketing, spend more on making sure we have polished like learn to plays and a lot of the like elements, like we're bringing in a PR firm to help like reach audiences we couldn't otherwise reach. And that's all the kind of stuff like I'm very like not, it's important that we make sure we have the game first, and I'm very much, everything is done. But now that we know that there's going to be like, there's this traction, it's being able to lay the groundwork. We can do some cooler like posters and point and purchase things for stores, and we can increase some of the bells and whistles around it. And we can also invest more in the long term, right? Building more like, and I don't want to talk about some of this stuff, but like there's a lot of these things where, we want to upgrade our technological back end and allow for some other cool things that we didn't have the money to invest in and wasn't necessarily the right call to make up front, that we now feel much more confident saying, okay, now it's not just, can we, what's the plan for year one, which we did a lot of time on. And, we've talked about having a very detailed plan for what the different organized play structures are and what the release schedule is and what's set 2 and what's set 3 and how all that stuff planned out. Now it's like, okay, what's the 5-year plan, right? How do we build out to that? And what are the things that we can continue to grow? And it's stuff we've of course had conversations around, but it's one thing to say like, okay, this is kind of the general sense of where we're going to be. And it's another like, okay, no, now we're going to start spending our time and resources to make sure that year 3 is crushing it and year 5 is ready, and what happens at each tier. So it just, the more that we have gotten this excitement and this enthusiasm, the more we have been able to really commit, all in. And just to also address your kind of implied question, we are not a big squad, man. It is 6 people and me that are bringing this thing to life. And so it is not a giant faceless corporation that's got millions of dollars throwing at this. This is a thing where we did a Kickstarter last summer. We could not have made this game without the Kickstarter. We poured every dollar of the Kickstarter to make the version of the Kickstarter and the first bits of the retail release in the back end that we needed. Now with these new pre-orders that we're getting in, we're going to use that to build the next giant tier of things. So it is that kind of exciting snowball type effect that lets us become, in a certain sense, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where now that we know we've got, we built something that's a core that people love, those people believe in us enough that we can build the things that will bring the the giant community with it, right? And that's why we built SolForge Fusion in a way that has all the depth and excitement and stuff that you guys have been digging into, but also that it can be, anybody can get into it, right? Just pick any 2 decks, shuffle them, and go. And it's play any 2 cards. Combat happens very simply. The board state doesn't get too crazy. Your memory's not too taxed, right? All these things that should make it easy for a lot of people to come in and build a big tent that builds that community, which is what you need to sustain for the long term. I talked about this last time I was on here, but I'm building something that's here to be for decades, and you have to get past year release 1 to get to year 1 to get to year 3 to get to but year 10 doesn't seem like a possibility until you start seeing the kind of the feel from players. Like we believe in it. It's what I've built from the beginning as part of the strategy. But now that we have that visceral, it's here and people are reacting the way we had hoped they would, it is now, it's now moving at a very fast pace with a lot of really exciting things. And we're going to be expanding. Obviously we won't be able to manage it all at the scale we're talking about, which is great, but adds its own challenges, right? I mean, I very much, there was a period when we did the original SolForge and we were up to about 30 people. We had a whole digital development team. We had a whole, very large infrastructure. And I was not the leader I needed to be at that time. And managing a team of 30 is very different than managing a team of 7 or 6. And knowing how you maintain a good company culture, knowing how you grow intelligently and bring the right people in, and knowing how you use that to serve the game and serve the community and not just grow for the sake of growing or to say you've got blah number of people or whatever, is all stuff I take very seriously now, and the whole team is well aware of. And so, learned a lot of those lessons and excited to apply them here.
Man, that's so wonderful to hear. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. It really inspires me too. I'm just hoping and believing in the success of you guys in SolForge Fusion. So cheers to that. And now let's hit that lightning round. Justin, I'm going to give you a topic, and then you give me a short synopsis of your thoughts on that mechanic, and particularly as a designer, what it means to you. So let's start with denial, which is prevention, cancels, and those kinds of effects in a game. How do they make you feel?
Yeah, so starting just from my perspective as a player, I loved those things, right? Force of Will was my favorite card playing in Magic. I loved counterspell decks. I loved basically stopping every single thing that you could do and then just eventually just beating you because you couldn't do anything. As a designer, that is terrible. That is terrible. What kind of a monster? What am I enabling? In all seriousness, the important upsides of denial strategies is feeling like you have some agency and interaction, right? If you feel like your opponent can do anything they want to you and you have no way to interact or stop what they're doing, then that can feel bad. So some elements of being able to interact with the opponent is nice. However, as a general rule, don't stop people from playing the game. Find other ways to interact. Let them play the thing and then react to the thing, and then do that a bunch of times. And that's a much better experience than, sorry, you can't play, right? Resource denial, counter spells, like that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, it's a delicate seasoning, right? A little bit goes a long way, and too much will ruin the dish.
You don't want it to be too salty, right? Which it can very easily get.
People get real salty with counterspells.
That's right.
They get real salty.
Second mechanic, which I think you're uniquely positioned to talk about as a Magic Pro, is resource cards. And so this is the idea that the resources that you're going to ramp up into throughout the game are actually held in the draw deck rather than outside of it or not present at all. How do you feel about resource cards mechanically?
This is a classic hot button issue, right? Everybody complains about mana screw and Magic and running out of getting the bad things and getting unlucky, and everybody's going to solve that problem by making the resource system go away. I am much more sympathetic to the upsides and downsides of those systems, right? The variance that they create allows for a lot of really interesting depth and complexity and game states. The fact that even SolForge Fusion obviously got rid of that, and we've created a resource system that's much, sort of more opaque in the sense that you just play any cards you want, but there's this hidden kind of resource behind it. It has a lot of big upsides, but also we are forced to be in a world where you have to pick 2 factions and play them. And the mana system in Magic allows you to have this. You could play up to 5 colors, no problem. You could play giant monsters on little cards, and you have that, again, kind of infinite construction and building experience that their resource system enables. And so, of course, there's a lot of difficult trade-offs there. And you knew you weren't going to get a simple, clean answer out of me on this one. But I think that, much like with the denial answer, what I'll say is make sure that people can play the game, right? As much as possible, don't make there be non-games. Within that space, resource cards, ways to accelerate, ways to decelerate, some games that move fast, some games that move slow. That is exciting. And so I think there's some room for it, but as much as possible, don't create the null states or minimize the null states where it's like, well, I didn't get lands, I didn't get to play, this wasn't really fun.
Makes perfect sense. Moving on, we have the third, which is the idea of silver bullets as card design. And these are typically cards that would release in a card pool to answer a problem in a metagame or in the card pool more generally. Very niche, very corner case. Silver bullets. What do you think?
Yeah, so I might take the counter position on this one. I generally like silver bullets in a trading card game. I think that they do a lot of work, right? At the end of the day, as a game designer, developer, I feel like I'm pretty good at this, right? I'm playing games at the top levels, developing games at the top level, and I work with a lot of really smart people over the years. But we're still going to make mistakes, right? Sometimes you're going to miss, and some cards are going to be too good. And having silver bullet type cards in the pool gives you an escape valve, right? If this card is a strategy is running rampant, having some, at a fundamental level, you want any strategy that gets too good, there should be strategies that can attack it. Now, the term silver bullet maybe applies that it's like way too niche and way too devastating, right? Obviously, the further you go down that road, the worse it is. But for example, in a game like SolForge Fusion, one of the great things about it is because each hand you draw 5 cards, you're only going to play 2 of them. Having a few silver bullets hanging around in your deck is actually a really good strategy, right? Some cards, it's like, okay, well, if my opponent's playing this is going to be really valuable. But if they're not, I just won't play that card. It's actually really important part of how you should build your deck and how you should think about it. And so I think it does a lot of work that lets us, kind of take our foot off the brakes a little bit and make more really cool things happening by knowing that we give players the tools to combat it, and that's part of the play experience. Now, again, the game engine matters a lot here. If I have to draw a card and it's completely dead in like a game where you just draw 1 card a turn and it's completely dead if my opponent's not playing that strategy, and it's game over if they are, that's not that fun either. So again, game engine and whatnot matters, but I actually think a good dosing of direct strategy attacking type cards that are very variant in power depending upon what your opponent is doing, is a great way to create a responsive metagame and a reactive game.
Love it. Moving on, we have the concept of free. And, it's interesting because I was thinking, well, this doesn't really apply in SolForge Fusion, but it absolutely does, because you have cards that skip essentially the card cost, where they might not take an action. You can play 3 cards on a turn instead of 2.
The keyword is literally free.
Yeah, the keyword's literally free.
Right.
So
yeah,
you know how I feel about free.
Yeah, so let's talk about, we've seen a lot of things in our time as card gamers where usually if you see a problem, most of the time, it's because the cost of something that made it balanced suddenly got removed. So how do you feel about free as a designer?
Yeah, so I think there's a subcategory of player, of which I am a member, where the joy of being able to cheat whatever the system is that you put me in, whatever the box that you put me in, is so much fun. Today. It's so much fun. It's just like, oh my God, look what I can do. Like, yeah, you thought I could only play 2 cards, but I just played 4. Right? There's something really fun about that. Now, again, a lot of this just comes down to, is that something that becomes degenerate or not, is really what I think what you're getting at. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to give you a concrete tip on how to handle that, what I do, quite literally when I'm working in a new game engine is I think, okay, what are all the fundamental resources that I have, right? There's number of card plays a turn, there's mana, there's card draws, there's whatever, right? All the things that I have available to me. And if I'm going to let you cheat one of those systems, or maybe a couple of systems, some of them I'm going to hold very constant, right? So in SolForge Fusion, yeah, you can make free cards happen. It's not that easy, but playing a third card every now and then is very possible. Playing a fourth card feels really cool, very rare. Playing all 5 cards in your hands is very, very, very rare. But I don't let you draw extra cards. So the most that's ever going to get out of hand is you're going to play 5 cards out of your hand. That's going to be crazy. And I keep a very tight rein on free. Generally speaking, it's going to be conditionally free. You're going to have to work for it, and so you can get yourself into this position, but it can never get too out of hand because the most you could ever do would be the 5 cards that you have. And so by picking which resources you want to keep a tight leash on, you're allowed to let loose a little bit on other ones. But again, just like with, any of the ones that you're talking about here, it's always, you got to be very careful. Free is one of those red flags that your development team, when you're really trying to balance your cards, like every card that says free on it or gives you free plays or breaks a resource to let you just cheat this game system is something you've got to spend a lot of time testing and balancing to make sure it's not going to, go off the rails and ruin a game experience.
Makes total sense to me. Second from last year, we have the concept of limit one per deck as a balancing mechanic, particularly. There's a lot of designers that would say, well, if a card's too strong, we can just limit the chances that you'll see it in your draw deck, and that kind of makes it okay. How do you feel about the idea of limiting cards as like a 1 per deck idea?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this one. I think in general it's lazy development. This is maybe be the more controversial answers you've been trying to get out of me here, but
we got him, ladies and gentlemen. We got him.
Yeah, I just think it's just because it creates you're basically telling your players like this card's too good. And then we'll just some games it matters, some games it doesn't. Good luck. That is unfortunate to me. I'd rather that the cards become good contextually and that they are balanced in such a way that, oh my God, if I draw this card in this matchup, it's amazing. Or in combination with this other thing, it's really cool. As opposed to just look, this card's just too good. We can't let you play with 2 of those, but we'll still let you play with 1. I'm like, it's just a weird place to live. To give it credit on the other side, of course, it creates these high drama moments where you're hoping to get your one of a kind card and get it, but I feel like those drama moments exist generally speaking without that limit. So to me, it just feels a little bit lazy.
Couldn't agree more. And then finally, we have everybody's favorite, Recursion, which is, as you know, can probably cause some problems. What do you think when I say Recursion?
Yeah. So, again, giant red flag, much like with free and, negating plays. Those things are, cheating resource systems, recurring things. Obviously, immediate red flag as far as how am I developing this? How am I making sure it's fun? And when I think about it on a high level, it's, look, if games are about the variety of experiences you're able to explore, if the best thing for me to do is recur and play the same thing over and over again, not fun, right? Bad experience. However, if you're playing with the core tension of the game, right, which is, I have very limited resources in, say, a game like Magic where I maybe not have any cards to play and I can recur something I really need, or, even a game like SolForge Fusion where, I have very limited cards in play and they don't tend to survive that long. So being able to pull something back that I need when I need it could be really meaningful. Having that available can enhance gameplay and create some more interesting long-term strategies and synergies and, come from behind moments. And so, this is another one of those, season lightly kind of things. Make sure, generally speaking, the recursion action should be marginally worse than your standard action, but you're being able to use it as a tool when you don't have a good standard action. Your normal actions would be subpar. Being able to pull recursion in is cool, or a rarity where you're trying to make very, combos and specific things happen. And it's something that can help you smooth the gears to make something really special happen very rarely.
It's really interesting. SolForge kind of breaks every rule by design, which is amazing. But I was thinking about recursion of particularly the discard pile, because a lot of times the cards you discard are not the cards you played. So if you're recurring, you're really only recurring I guess you could recur the upgraded version because it's also in your discard pile. But one of the things we were talking about earlier that I kind of wanted to, it's kind of the whole conversation really, it's all framed around this idea of balance, particularly as it pertains to, I think, the default mindset for me when I'm thinking about this stuff is how it applies competitively. And a lot of these things, you were talking about those when you can cheat out cards, how much fun you have, right? So do you ever feel like, in terms of those creativity being born of restriction, how much of a negative do you think the almost natural slant towards thinking of these things through the context of balance for competitive play puts on you as a designer? Because I know, like, if I were designing a game, I don't envy people with this job, but if I were designing a game, it's like I would immediately be like, all right, cheating cards out and free, can't have it, right? Recursion, can't have it. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I did a lot of work to design chess. So, like, I don't know, how do you balance all that?
Well, that's why all my answers were generally hedgy a little bit, right? Because I do think you want little bits of all of this stuff. I do think that you don't want to, and again, this was one of the biggest lessons I learned coming at this as a pro player. When I first started designing games, I was doing all of those same things. The first couple sets that I worked on for Versus System, like, they are so overdeveloped. They're so, like, little edges here and there and basic kind of tactical strategy back and forth. It's like, it's fun. Yeah, like you said, it's kind of very chess-like in that experience. And it's just, you take all the juice out of it. You take all the excitement out of it. And so I've learned over the years that you need to be able to think about all the different categories of players and remember that the fun of play is the most important thing. Like, yes, we want to have a game that holds up in high level competitive play. Yes, we want to have that deep strategy there. But if that comes at the cost of just the pure fun of the experience, like, you've lost before you started. And so, is it easy to make that balance? No, it is not, right? You want to make sure the dream world is like everybody feels like they're doing something broken all the time and somehow it all works, right? Like, that's the feeling I want to get, like, oh, I got this cool thing and this haymaker and then this, and then, like, oh, there's no chance I can win, but now I got this, right? Like, that's, as much as possible, you want to create space for that experience where no one strategy ends up getting pushed too far. And that really was sort of the key evolution of my thinking around what game balance means, right? Balance does not mean everything is equal to everything else. What balance means is that no one thing is so dominant that nothing else can battle it, right? It's not just one degenerate strategy that everything coalesces around. And again, it's one of the things that's phenomenal about a game like SolForge Fusion. In a traditional TCG, inevitably, the metagame will just coalesce around 1, 2, maybe 3 strategies that have become the dominant strategies, and everybody just kind of has to play that or react to that, and that's it, right? And a game with an infinite variety of decks and no 2 decks are the same, there's always this discovery process of, okay, well, maybe this combination, or maybe I could try this different variation in this combo, and that's going to create this really fun space of, again, constant discovery and exploration. And we've been able to build in so many of those fun moments with the fact that our algorithm guarantees that they're coming, right? The combos are built into the deck, so you're never going to have the robot lord without a robot that you can find, right? So some of it we just, like, kind of pre-bake in for you for fun, but you also get to find dream of or find the perfect pair and say, oh, wow, it's so cool. When I bring in this life gain guy with these armor guys, it turns out that, like, that works really well because every extra point of health matters way more for the armor creature. And neat, I'm going to play those guys together, right? And, like, all these little, to varying degrees of subtlety or beat you over the head, we're able to create these moments of excitement and discovery, forever. Much more so than any other game I think that's ever existed, frankly.
Well, Justin, it's always so enlightening to talk to you. So we really do appreciate you taking the time. Before we officially get out of here, I just want to open the floor up to you. Is there anything that you want people to know, or anywhere they can follow you or find out more about what you're doing before we head on out?
Yeah, I mean, so if you go to stoneblade.com, we have an email list you can sign up for where I send out updates and show off cool new stuff as it's coming. And there's also a link to join our Discord. That's where our whole team lives, and we've got a great, growing, active community there. You can ask any questions you want and interact with players. You can play, again, games like SolForge Fusion right now for a free on Tabletop Simulator, and very soon with your very own unique decks, possibly acquired from Team Covenant. And there's a lot of fun, cool stuff Shameless plug hashtag. It's no, it's been, I also I have my own podcast called Think Like a Game Designer, where I teach game design principles and I interview and talk to the best game designers and people in the industry to extract these kinds of principles. As you can probably tell by the end of this chat, I love talking about design, and I think it's just an a lifetime pursuit to constantly learn and get better at. So I'm always talking to the people who I can learn from, and then I try to share that with everybody else. So you can follow, if you like listening to the sound of my voice, that's the best way to do that for hours and hours and hours.
Amazing. Well, we really do appreciate you coming on, and honestly, like, I am so, it's like every time we talk, every time I interact with a game, every time I see something about it, I just get more excited about SolForge Fusion. I do think you guys have captured lightning in a bottle, and I'm so ready for that to come out. So if you haven't checked out that game, definitely do. I believe currently, and knock on the table, release is scheduled retail wise for June of SolForge.
Yeah, that's not. It turns out the downside of having so many pre-orders means it's going to take us a little bit longer to print. So it's going to be pushed back a little bit. I think Gen Con release is what we're going for now. So it's coming. Yeah, the printers are running, but it just takes a lot of time to make this much of a sweet game.
For sure. That's a quality problem, and that's a problem you want to have before you release the first set, not after you release the first set. So it's really important to me that we make enough, right? The worst thing I think could happen is we have a game that everybody loves and then we don't have enough stock and it's gone, right? And I want to make sure that we don't make the mistake of releasing too early and not having enough to make sure that people can play the game and then continue to go to their local store. Like if you had a local store, you build a community of players and they come in every week, and then all of a sudden you can't run your Shield event because there's no product. I feel like that would be a really stupid way to throw this game away. I'm telling you, every time you talk. Every time you talk, I'm more in, right? I mean, that's we talk about it on this series. We ended up lumping these. We were originally calling it 7 Deadly Sins of Game Design.
I think, yeah.
But then now it's a continuation of our How to Ruin a Game series. And a lot of those first topics were on mistakes publishers make when it comes to releasing and supporting expandable games and how that makes them fail. And the stuff you say all the time, it's our first conversation all the way through every podcast, every time I hear you talk, every time we're interacting, you just say the right things that make me realize that you know what you're doing. I totally agree with you. And I think SolForge has a really bright future. So if you haven't checked that out yet and you're listening to this, I highly, highly, highly encourage you do so.
And also check out, courtesy of Justin's shameless plug, I now feel like I can say it as well. You should check out our subscription for that game. You can get boxes of it delivered right to your door automatically. We'll charge you a couple weeks before. No money on the table until then. So we'd love to have you as a part of our community on that front as well. Justin, thank you again for being here, and we can't wait to talk to you later.
Oh, I love it. Anytime. Looking forward to being back.